fellow patriots. Good morning. We are coming to you from Southern California, where Hurricane Hillary just got done coming through here. It was mostly a dud in San Diego area, but it did a lot of damage in Baja California and the surrounding lower and upper deserts in California. We had a lot of mudslides. There's some freeway closures. But looks like Baja took the brunt of it, and then it was pushed out up into Canada, and now there's a huge high pressure dome over the Midwest, so the Midwest is suffering some seriously high temperatures. So we got a great show for you tonight. Nathan's going to join me here real soon, and we have SG Anon coming on. I've been following SG Anon for better part of a year now, and found him back around file 17. So that's going to be a great show for you. In the meantime, wanted to go over a few things that we did during the show last night. Had a few technical difficulties. Wanted to apologize for that. You know how the equipment thing goes, and maybe share a few things that we talked about before we get those guys on. So I'm gonna bring up and share my screen, and first thing we're gonna talk about is how there is a new corporation. So in 2018, Trump bankrupted the United States Inc., closed it down. Hence all the fences around all the buildings in 2020 and the chaos that was going on. When they stole the election, they had to open a new corporation. So that new corporation is called the White House Inc. And I will show you that in just one moment on Dun & Bradstreet. Okay, so here on your screen, let me get my picture out of the way. You're going to notice the White House office. That is the new federal corporation in the District of Columbia that was opened in 2021. And if you scroll down here, I'll show you guys. So key principal, Joseph R. Biden Jr., or whoever's playing Joseph R. Biden Jr., is the key principal for that corporation. You'll see here 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. The website, whitehouse.gov, and industry, executive, legislative, and other general government support. So this is the new corporation for the United States. They don't give you contact to, probably got to pay for that. But again, Joseph R. Biden, president of the new federal corporation. So one more thing I wanted to cover with you guys before we bring on Nathan and SG that we didn't get into last night. We did talk about Dr. Jan Halper, and she brought up the fact that the corporation was closed in 2018, and that we took the gold back from the Vatican. And she mentioned a picture of Trump with the Pope. This is that picture of Trump with the Pope when we went and took our gold back. That was early in 2017 when he did his, I think, 7-country around the world trip. He went to Saudi Arabia, did the sword dance, went to China, into the city there, what is that, Forbidden City? And visited quite a few world leaders on that trip, probably informing them of what was coming, what we're living through now. So this was that picture. I am going to do a show soon on Melania. Melania, from what we've learned, was the flagpole, and her dresses meant, whenever she wore a dress, it was relaying a message and meant something. So this particular picture looks like a black dress. It looks like black means stop, end of message. So probably telling us that the Vatican is no more. All right, we got 2 more pictures I'm gonna bring up here in just one moment, and then we'll be on with Nathan and SG. All right, in this picture, you'll see this was the inauguration when she was wearing the Tiffany blue dress that Jackie wore, symbolizing again that things were changing, and we were gonna take care of some business. All right, this last picture is when she got off the phone with President Trump in Florida after leaving DC for the last time. When she got on the plane, she was wearing another black dress. End of message. When she got off the plane, she was wearing this dress, dark to light. Dark to light's what we're going through right now, Patriots. So hang in there, and let's get to the interview. All right, so without further ado, let's bring Nathan in and SG and get to this. It's an awesome interview. We went for about an hour and 20 minutes with SG, and it turned out great. So enjoy. Here we go. SG, how you doing, sir?
Good evening. Thank you for your patience.
Hey,
Oh,
SG, how you doing, buddy?
you're more than welcome. Families first. I got plenty of time. I'm out on the West Coast, so it's still a little light out here. Nathan's out Ohio way. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen.
So,
hey, no problem.
So, how long do we have you for? I know it's late out there, and I don't want to keep you too long. What's our schedule like?
My friend, I think we could do a good 60 minutes, maybe an hour and 15.
Awesome. Okay, good. Nathan and I give you a little bit background on us real quick. It's come up on your show a couple of times, and Nathan and I have been listening to you since about the 17th episode, the audio file.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
when I found you, I literally went back. I was on my way to Sacramento, and I literally went back and listened from the first audio file all the way up to the current one, and I've been following you ever since. So I love your information and just the way you bring it, which is probably why everybody wants to get you on their shows these days.
I'm honored, my friend. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I know it's come up on your show a couple of times, and you really didn't comment on it much. Nathan and I have both got awake. I've been awake since about 2017, or I'd say March of 2017, and you had talked about. Someone asked you a question on one of your shows about state nationals, and you didn't really want to comment too much on it. So just to let you know, Nathan and I are both state nationals. We've been in this movement for a long time, and that's one of the things that woke me up is finding out about the state national movement. So if you do want to get into any of that tonight, we're open to that too. I would like to ask you. I usually like to find out how and when people woke up. If you're okay with sharing that information.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Yeah. So what was kind of the catalyst that brought you to the point where you knew that, things weren't as they appeared, and there was something amiss and afoot in our world behind the veil?
Well, so that's going to take us back all the way back to 2010. When I was in college and I was doing a research design paper for a class on just anatomy and nutrition. And the topic that I had chosen for the research paper was a term paper for the semester, was the nutrition effects, the cellular nutrition effects of soft drinks on the human body. In other words, what happens at the cellular level when we consume aspartame, high fructose corn syrup, all of the other things that are in soft drinks. And so this was back, in those days, and you could get a lot of good information off the internet at that time. The censorship was not nearly ramped up to the point that I got ramped up to post 2012-13 with the new Hussein Obama presidency and the events that happened in those era in that presidency time frame. And one of the things that I had gotten for my research design was a number of scholarly papers and things like that, some of them taken directly actually from the NIH website, discussing the components of soft drink flavor profiles and how the components are affected at the nutritional level in the body. In other words, how the body utilizes everything that goes to make up whatever your Coca-Cola or your Pepsi or whatever has in it. And one of the papers was discussing a protein derivative called HEK293. I thought that sounds really weird. I've never heard of that being a food additive, and that was what the paper was all about. It was a protein and food additives. It was heavily used by PepsiCo and Coca-Cola at the time. And upon further digging, HEK293 actually stands for the 293rd version or revision of a protein derived from human embryonic kidney, which is where HEK comes from. And so my relatively young brain at that time, I was relatively smart, but I was young and ignorant, but it sort of came across to me as a pseudo-forced cannibalism, and no one knew about it. And so I began digging really hard on, well, how can that possibly be legal? There's no way this is legal. And I found out not only is it legal, but it's actually encouraged by the system and the regulatory apparatus that's been put in place in the world with the abortion. At that time, it was Roe v. Wade. And then you had the biomedical research sort of complex that tied into the abortion complex, because all of that was in biological waste disposal. So there was a lot of overlap in that. And then you would have food companies like Sinomix or Cinemix at the time that would overlap with that biological research arena. And they would take in a very similar way to, if any of your viewers out there have ever seen the show Breaking Bad, I believe it's in the 5th season. They have a lot of different flavor profiles and things that they try with a transnational corporation headquartered out of Europe, right?
Yep.
And I think they were merging flavors of, ketchup and onions and different sauces and things like that. So it's the same sort of laboratory synthetic process. And that woke me up to the fact that something was majorly wrong, that there was an orchestrated design for mass scale evil that was happening, and hardly anyone knew about it. And even if you showed them the paper right off of the website, as I learned with the professors at the college at that time, they would tell you that you were sort of FOS and crazy and not to talk about it again. As a matter of fact, I was nearly expelled from the school just for this. And I was I had a high profile, or excuse me, a high flying GPA at the time.
Wow.
So then, that culminated in a process about 14, 15 months later. Actually, it was probably about 18 months later, where I ended up trying to join the United States Armed Forces. I wasn't successful because of an injury and a health condition that came up in that IADT process, that boot camp process. But I got a chance to meet a couple of really great people who stayed in my life and who were local to my area. Or I should say their residence, their permanent nesting ground, if you will, was local to my area. And one of them was my mentor that I talked about in my early files and passed away earlier this year. They'd been all over the place and gotten to see a lot of different things. And because of my sort of ancillary spherical connection to all of that, I got a lot of extracurricular, unofficial, if you want to call it, discussion and education in things like code breaking, cryptography, message interpretation, deciphering, hacking, all of these sorts of things that fit my worldview that was developing at the time. Because when that happened to me when I was 19, it sort of drove me into a place of a spiritual crisis. As a matter of fact, I actually rejected the faith that I'd grown up with at the time and went through a very intense spiritual journey for the next few years beyond that. And one of the components of that journey for me became looking at the world with a dual reality lens long before we arrived at the point now where we're now seeing that dual reality played out for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And so when we saw the things happen with the Trump presidency, we saw the fortification period and everything that was going on. Q showed up on the scene in 2017 and really made a hit in 2018 and onward from then. And then we saw the 2020 election, the pandemic launched on mankind, which was the culmination of a depopulation agenda that's decades old. And that a lot of people have been talking about at different points along the way, and they've all, of course, been shut down. It was very apparent to me that there was some sort of intense power struggle going on between good actors somewhere in the U.S. institutions and the U.S. military and some sort of deep state infestation or deep state hydra across all of our government institutions and society. And the two were vying for control. You could really see that with Trump's executive orders and the way that he sort of laid out cheese for traps. You don't set traps unless you're trying to catch vermin. And so that's I think been the process that we've been living through. And this post 2020, post 2021 Joe Biden, fake Joe Biden inauguration that we've all been living through this period, I think is where we accelerated that process from a mousetrap here and a mousetrap here to a dragnet that we've been trying to drag all around the world and get as many of them as humanly possible, because all of this ties back to the executive orders from the Trump administration, military law as it exists under a continuity and preservation of government scenario, and also the laws of the Geneva Convention, because we kicked off this new phase with the launch of COVID-19 into the world, which was this biological weapon in World War III. So I know that's a really long background context for me, but it sort of explains, I hope, for all of your viewers out there, where I'm coming from and why I have the lens on the current events that we have now that I do.
No, that actually was awesome. It really takes us to a place, because I was hoping to engage you in a level of going back further, because I know, like most people that have listened to your shows, they're probably up to date on current events, aside from the last 3 days where they're pushing the COVID narrative again, and Lionsgate's locking people down with mask mandates again. But to push back a little further in time, if you're okay with that, and talk about a few things that got us up to this point. You had mentioned Joe Biden and the fake Joe Biden, and it's like I look at him and it's so obvious to me. And I tell my wife, and my wife, she puts up with it like most wives, and she just doesn't see it. And I that's one of the things I kind of wanted to get your opinion on is Derek talks a lot about Joe Biden being a plant like back in World War II, where the Philippine president had a double, and it's Joe Biden has extended 12 of Trump's executive orders, but at the same time, nobody in Congress or the Senate calls any of this stuff out. So it's kind of hard to figure out what side this fake Joe Biden is even playing on, which is the war we're in. They want to keep us all confused, but what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I would submit to everyone out there that if we're trying to get all of the cockroaches to come out from behind the countertops and underneath the fridge and from under the bookshelves and out of the walls, one of the best ways to do that is to stick a queen cockroach, an imposter queen cockroach, if you will, in the middle of the fray and begin issuing directives and edicts and see what happens. And I think that's exactly been the purpose of the Joe Biden administration. I do believe that Joe Biden is, I think Derek calls him a plug. I would call him an installation, a lot like a toilet is installed. He's there to draw out the deep state cockroaches, but also if we're looking at the actions of this administration, both here domestically and around the world, he is single-handedly doing incredible and enormous amounts of damage to the stability and the control structures of this deep state apparatus that's based out of Western Europe and North America. The pushing for the new NATO Secretary General, who went down in history for Germany as their worst defense minister ever, couldn't actually keep enough rifles on hand for the German military to participate effectively in NATO exercises. Underneath her tenure, I think her name is von der Leyen. Underneath her tenure, the German military showed up to a NATO exercise with broomsticks because they didn't have the actual equipment on hand. And so the Biden administration and the U.S. government in general has always sort of controlled the directionality of NATO in conjunction with the powers that be at the UN, because it's been the military, the Washington, D.C. based military industrial complex that has influenced the actions of the NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance, over this last half century. So we're watching this guy destroy the US dollar on the world stage. We're watching this guy make catastrophic decisions domestically that are destabilizing the economy and crushing the bank system here at this in the United States. We're watching him essentially single-handedly disempowering NATO's ability to resist and offer a kinetic conflict to Russia that would be problematic in any sense. He's destroyed the U.S. and North American manufacturing base, and he's destroyed the Western European manufacturing base vis-a-vis the attack on their energy infrastructure and the absolute insanity that's going on with Germany and their manufacturing economy or in fuel-based economy right now. And so I would submit that if you are a patriotic power and all of these different component angles on the mission are necessary to accomplish the mission worldwide and bring the Hydra down, you can't have that going on the head of the plug that you're going to use to sort of save the day, which I do believe is Donald Trump in some respects, but I really think it's also we the people in other respects.
Right.
But it's got to go down on the deep state for history books. But there's also other advantages and other necessities that have to come by putting in a player or an actor or an espionage agent, if we want to call it that. Because until we enforce the governmental levers and the societal levers to move and gears to move here in the United States in a certain direction, we won't know the local law enforcement, the local community levers of power, the state legislators, the federal legislators, all of the different bureaucrats and staffers who are for or against us until they are forced to choose based on the actions and the directives of the executive, which path they're going to enforce and take. Are they going to attack we the people? Are they going to participate in what is clearly an unconscionable Manchurian exercise of power, or will they resist? That's a big part of this process.
Yeah, and we've been seeing that now ever since the launch of the COVID-19 pandemic and all that. And I would like to ask you if part of the plan would be to have the people, the public, we the people, take a part in this. When you talk to people outside of any of the awakening movements that are going on, they're seeing all this going down. They're seeing the big Biden stuff going on. They're seeing, all the chaos with these storms, which, we wanted to get into, the Maui stuff, the Canada forest fires are affecting the Midwest. They're seeing all this stuff, and they're seeing doom and gloom, and they're seeing that, the China takeover and all this stuff like that. How do we, do you see, I guess my question would be, do you see a pathway in everything that in the intel that you've gathered where those people will be brought on board at some point to see what a lot of us who spend a lot of time doing this have already seen and known?
Well, absolutely, because I think it's a necessary part of the process. And I think it's sort of an inevitability when you present the world a situation that is this chaotic and this sort of left of center and awry into left field after such stability and prosperity underneath the Trump administration, right? And I would submit to everyone out there that the Trump administration was phase one of a much longer military operation that we've been living through, because most of Trump's actions strengthened and fortified the American society in critical ways. We had cyberspace and cybersecurity consolidated and fortified. We had the creation of Space Force. We had economic prosperity that allowed a lot of people to pour into their savings accounts to offload a lot of this deep state cabalist consumer debt. We really saw a strengthening of the American system, and I would submit to everyone out there that the primary reason for that was because we had a period, or we were going to have a period, where sort of a famine-esque style period of time was going to happen so that we could draw everyone out and end this war and truly revert the earth to how it's supposed to be. And in order to accomplish that, we need the realization, from the greatest majority of the population. Q says 4 to 6% are lost forever. So I'm extrapolating from that about 9 in 10 people will come around to the basic core issues and will be able to align themselves with one another on the basic core issues when this is all over. The core issues being medical freedom, the right to decide what to do with your own body, the right to speak your mind, right? The right to not be censored regardless of what you're saying. Even if you're making threats, right? If you're making threats, you can turn that over to law enforcement and allow them to handle that, right? It doesn't have to be restricted in the speech. You just have to understand that there are consequences for the things that you say and do. These basic tenets of society, these basic realizations of what it means to be human are sort of all on the table right now. And everyone's confused and whipped up on the side that you're discussing about, because you've got a lot of that parrot talking mockingbird media in one ear, and then you've got a lot of gaslit, very frightened, well-meaning, but very frightened family, friends, and close colleagues and close confidants on the other hand. that are tying themselves together in a very effective sort of consciousness suppression web. And in order to get them out of that, sometimes you have to get really kinetic and obvious with it, and you have to make it really apparent, right? We saw what happened with the pandemic in 2020. Nearly every constitutional American and nearly every citizen of the United States that had any basis of understanding for what the Constitution is, what civics is, what our rights really are here in this nation, was immediately aware of what was going on. And yet we had a full 60% of the population that went along with everything lock, stock, and barrel right from the start and never even questioned what was going on. And that's a very concerning state to be in as a consciousness, as a civilizational consciousness overall. That's a very suppressed, very lethargic, very apathetic, very easy to take over sort of place. And in order to get that stirred up, to get the giant, right, the sleeping giant to awake, sometimes you really have to get up there in his eyelids and start screaming. And I think that's exactly what we've seen with things like Maui, the Canadian fires, the Grecian fires, the African coups that are going on, the South American fires, the stopping of worldwide shipping lanes, right? We saw more lanes halted in the Panama Canal. The Suez Canal currently under investigation with some tankers that collided down in that area. So we've got a lot of the same sorts of events that we've seen in the last 3 to 5 years happening again, except when the conspiracy theorists were being told that they were crazy 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Now you have a significant portion of that 60% that we referenced earlier at this present time that is much, much further along in the curiosity and what the heck is going on journey. And the conspiracy theorists all of a sudden aren't looking so crazy anymore. And so when that cascade begins effectively, and I think we're already there, I think this year started it, and we're just continuing to roll that avalanche down the mountain. Eventually, we're going to hit that 7 in 10, that 8 in 10, that 9 in 10 mark, I think relatively quickly. And we'll start hearing public conversations in places of commerce and business and employment over these issues where everyone understands child sex trafficking is governmental facilitated and is approved of and is a common evil amongst most of the captured elected class. Money laundering is all of the captured elected class. The central bank consolidation of power around the world is a danger and a threat to humankind. The WEF is a threat to humankind, right? These are just basic tenets that we all have to understand going forward. And I don't think it's long in the wings before we're all having this conversation at the dinner table again.
Yeah, I hope so. I've literally had people that thought I was out of my mind a few years ago start asking me questions now and asking me what's coming and what's going on.
And that's been all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have another question, Nathan?
Basically, I guess we can get into the I guess like the he kind of SG kind of hit on it when we were talking about the Maui fires and the canal and all that stuff, but we're seeing all these things happen in the world, and we kind of went into the normal folks and how they're going to wake up. So I guess the only thing I would really kind of want to know is if we go back a little bit. This was like a confusing part for some people. It's been in a couple documentaries, but during the George Bush funeral, there was an envelope that was given, and I think we have a video. I don't know if we can bring this up here.
Did you want to bring that up? You want me to bring it up?
Yeah. Do you have that?
Yeah, let me.
So when it's handed off from a Secret Service agent to the Bush family, there's some looks that are given, and they look shocked. And I know this is going way back, but I did want to get your take on maybe SG what was said exactly in that, or maybe an overview of what you think what was said in that. Was that the initial we got you, we're coming for you kind of thing? Was that the initial Q movement? The team. What do you think? And same with you, Echo.
Excuse me. Sorry about that, gentlemen. On this particular issue, that's one of the most iconic moments, I think, in this journey that we've had so far. the looks on the faces of the Obamas, Clintons, and Bushes at Trump's inauguration, the military behind President Trump in the fashion that they were. And of course, we know that the military officers, or a significant number of the military officers up there, dealt with both the JAG Corps and military intelligence, which we know would have been connected in some form or fashion to Q, which goes all the way back to the Army of Northern Virginia, but that's a discussion for another day. Now, I think it's been speculation on everyone's lips ever since that event, what was in the envelopes, because that was the second major realization of what was happening to them in real time, right? And I think, from what I've seen out there, I'm not 100% sure. And I would feel remiss to speculate, right, without a good basis on that. But I could say this. Hillary Clinton was taken down on the iconic and symbolic date of 9/11/2016 for the first time. That was a detainment, and I think that was the riot act, the deal that was going to be made, and that at some point in time later, she would surrender herself. We have video of that event that actually occurred, and they manhandled her inside of that van. We had this event happen. I believe the funeral that in question was either 2018 or 2019. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's very, very likely that the events of the Clintons' takedown and what Q told us, that HRC had asked for a deal and they had told her no. And they likely interrogated her for everything that she was worth. And I do mean everything that she was worth. It's very likely that the envelopes that day had something to do with, or something pertaining to, what may have been disclosed, or what sorts of knowledge or secrets or sort of throwing under the bus, if you will, had actually occurred with different individuals along the way. We know that whatever the message was, it was relatively short because you could be read at a simple glance. So it's possible that we had pictures in those envelopes and not a message per se. And pictures carry a message of their own weight. I find it fascinating that this occurred at the funeral of H.W. Bush, and he had a wrinkled flag over the casket that day.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Which is very, that would be unheard of for a former president, right? Go back and look at Ronald Reagan's funeral and the flag that's over the casket. It's pristine. They spend hours ensuring that these flags are perfect in their form for former heads of state. And so considering what that was, we knew who was in control at that time. And I think in many respects, so did the individuals who were in attendance at the funeral. I just don't think that they honestly thought prior to the unveiling of those envelopes that they had permanently lost control. I think they had resigned themselves to this was going to be a really unpleasant winter, but spring would be upon us before too long, right? And that's not at all what has occurred. And so what we've seen now as a result of the events that have happened post that funeral, and then the launch of COVID-19 into the world and the implementation of some sort of preservation of government and very large worldwide military special operation, I think it's worth noting in that whole discussion that beginning with that funeral, that was sort of the kickoff of the realization of the deep state that this was going to be a war, that this was going to be an actual threat to their dominance and their hegemony. And we've seen that threat sort of manifested out, right? Anthony Fauci told us that COVID was coming in 2017, but it was strategically timed to interfere with what was happening in the 2020 cycle. And we saw a devolution plan implemented during 2020 and immediately after the election, a slew of executive orders from November 3rd to January 19. One of them titled Federal Mission Resilience. Resilience is preservation, right? Resilience is resistance and survival in the face of abject difficulty, right? Or something that is corrosive or in conflict with you. And so that's exactly what they literally told us, exactly what they were doing. And so I think this process being kicked off with that, it's really worth highlighting that day was the day where we got to see on their faces just what was really happening to them sink in.
Yeah. Do you want to play that, Echo?
Yeah. I'll play just a minute of it just so our audience knows what we're talking about. But I do want to hit on one thing because you brought up HRC. And Nathan and I have both been to classes and seminars with David Straight. Not sure if you're aware of who he is. And he talks about when Hillary went down and that he has the transcripts on his phone from the trial, and that Huma turned state's evidence on her. The funny part, I have trouble kind of putting together is the fact that, you know, after that, all of a sudden Huma's coming out and she's dating, I guess, Bradley Cooper or somebody. And it's like, you know, is she a plant, or, you know, you never know what's going on these days, but at
Hey,
some
Echo,
point
check
you're
your
right.
plug, your plug for your microphone. It's a little raspy there.
Isn't it? Let's play this real quick. So that's what we're talking about.
So the George H.W. Bush funeral came and went, and lots of strange things took place within this funeral. There's lots of YouTube videos out there where you can learn about Freemasons and conspiracies and all kinds of these things that are going on, and all of the different symbolisms and all that. But there was one little thing that took place that caught my eye more than anything else, and it tells such a story of what is really going on our screen. So this is when they're taking the alleged body, because who knows if there's really a body in that casket. I've even heard things about the way that the flag is draped over the casket, how that's not the way it's supposed to be. So think on that what you want, I guess. But if you look in the background there, you see Jeb, and he's got his hand over his heart. He's smiling. He's looking at the soldiers as they're carrying. He's got a sense of pride, I think, right there, as he's looking at America, and then all of a sudden he looks down, double take, stop. And look at the way that his face changes right there. His whole posture stiffens up. He is not angry. I saw another post, another video that talked about how Jeb Bush is angry when he sees this letter. But look at him. He's not angry. He's smiling here. He's got his hand over his heart. He's got that sense of pride flowing through him, and then all of a sudden a double take, and look at him. My goodness, he's stiffened up like a frickin' broomstick. That is not anger. That is fear. This is the Secret Service agent right here that passed the note to President Bush. He takes it. Right here, he slides it to Laura. He's got that look on his face, and who knows what that's saying. Laura's taking a look at it. Look at her face. Everybody's talking about Jeb. Let's look at Laura. She looks like she's just seen a ghost. Get out of the way. Get that big head out of the way, pal. All right, now look at her. She passes it. Double take. Oh, my God. Now look at her. I swear to God, it looks like she just saw a murder, like a brutal murder. Look. Oh, my God. Oh, crap. Oh, and he's looking around, not knowing what to do. That is a face of absolute despair. That is fear. That is confusion. That is not having any place to hide. I don't know what everyone else was thinking when they were looking at this, but something is in that paper. And I know that Hillary got some. I know that Pence's wife got one. But whatever is in there, oh, my God, I can't wait to find out what it is.
We can see their faces there. That's right after the casket goes past them. A Secret Service agent was off to the right, standing between the casket and George Bush, and he slips George the envelope. He looks at it. He shows his wife. She looks at it, and then Jeb looks at it, and then those are the faces that follow that observation right there. So yeah, so there was definitely something going on in there.
Hey, so SG, let me ask you this, because at that same funeral, HRC got a letter, Mike Pence got a letter, or his wife got a letter, and I want your opinion on this, because I've long held the opinion that Mike Pence is playing a role of the bad guy. And I mean, everybody just rails on this guy, and but the fact that his wife and himself got a letter at that funeral, and then he got the coin at when he was in the Senate for the vote. What's your take on Mike Pence? I've got another video. I don't know if it would even play, but it's the video of Christopher Miller praising the vice president for some of the being involved in some of the highest military operations our country's ever seen. Before they stepped away.
Vice President, I'm going off script again, I know, but I just want to personally thank you. We've been through some stuff. We've gone through some of the most complex military operations this country's ever conducted, and your steady hand and your leadership during those was a great source of strength for me. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your character. Thank you for your selfless service. Thank you for commitment. Thank you for being a mentor to me, Mr. Vice President. And with that, the floor is yours, sir.
What's your opinion on that?
Well, as far as the last issue, I got to tell you, I really don't know. It's possible that we had, Chris Miller being very genuine in those comments. It's also possible that Chris Miller was lying through his ever-loving teeth because he's a specialist in espionage operations, and those individuals sort of pretend to be something and someone that they're not as a career, right? But it's worth noting on Mr. Pence, just from the different research that I've fleshed out and done, he's come across a lot of nefarious stuff in his life, sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time, more than is statistically likely to happen. A slew of sexual assault allegations, both at the governmental level and in his personal life prior to his involvement in government. There's a caricature out there from his post-high school days when he would have been about 19, 20 years old that looks very much like him, and it was used to describe a situation of an active shooter and actually a murder that had occurred in a city, and I forget where the city was. I think it was in Oregon, but don't quote me on that. But the caricature very, very close to what Mike Pence's high school graduation picture actually resembles. We also had testimony from a former U.S. Intelligence official, now passed, who I believe to have been poisoned, discussing a deep Washington, D.C. based child trafficking ring that was facilitated by Chief Justice John Roberts of the Supreme Court and his connections with the Knights of Malta and the Jesuit societies around the world. And different governmental officials there within D.C. And all of the names, the Clinton, all of those sorts of things would make a lot of sense. But Mike Pence was actually also fleshed out by this former intel officer as being at the very least aware of what was going on. I think it's worth consideration that if you're aware of something like that going on, and at this stage in the game in 2023, you're not getting vocal about that, or you're not trying to drop major hints about that, I think it's possible that you were aware and you were sort of on that side, or you were sort of approving of it, right? Even if you weren't participating in it. And I can't make the allegations of whether or not he was. I can simply say that under that testimony that was given by this intelligence official, there were several conversations that occurred between Chief Justice Roberts and former Vice President Pence that dealt with a lot of this same issue. So playing the role now that we're seeing, and the embarrassment that's happening to Mr. Pence, and like with the Tucker Carlson interviews that were done, and where he came out and said, that's not my concern, it's very possible that he's just genuinely saying that, but I don't think Mr. Pence is unintelligent, and I don't think he would have said something like that if he were not under some sort of duress, because that's a political suicide. It's a maneuver that every one of these shrewd politicians would be sort of averse to saying, because they know how the mass consciousness will respond to the tonality of some things like that. And I just find it very fascinating that we're watching, Mr. Pence's campaign implode, and we're sort of watching his legacy at the very least be questioned by a vast majority of the American population, even while President Trump is saying that he was a great guy and everyone should lay off of him. And sort of, how this is playing out, I think it's anyone's guess on what was actually involved and how deep this all went. But I think one of the things to remember is that Vice President Pence had the authority to send the legislators back on January 6th, not to discount them or to discredit them, but to require the Congress to perform a 10-day audit of the complaints that were being alleged, to do an investigative process, take the electors back to their state legislatures and look at things and make sure that the election was on the up and up. That is constitutionally allowed. And Mr. Pence went against that and has come out multiple times since then saying that he had no choice.
Yeah.
You are 100% correct. 100% correct on that. And it's funny because I watched that interview on Tucker Carlson, and when he said that, the first thing that went through my mind, because I listened to the words a lot, and he said, the United States is not my concern. Well, the United States is a federal corporation that was bankrupted and closed in 2018. Had he said, America is not my concern, I would have taken it a little bit differently, but I don't know if it was just the words he used, but the fact that he said the United States kind of perked up my ears.
Yeah, we know that words mean everything and how they're said. And when you're talking about this stuff, and the United States, in America, it can mean two different things, and that's where those in the state national movement, get into the law books, the USC and things like that, and you can distinguish between, the 13th Amendment citizen and things like that. Are you familiar with any of that, SG?
Well, it's funny. At one point in time, the state national issue, I think, was sort of out of my research purview. But as I've gone along in this journey, I've gotten the chance to talk to a couple of individuals. Miss Vandersteel was one of them at one point along the way.
Good, yeah.
And really get an
Yeah.
education on what this means. And so my understanding, and I'm just going to pitch it to you, gentlemen, knowing that you've done the process and that you are recognized as state nationals and not U.S. citizens of the corporation. My understanding of it is that you are separating yourself from the illegal jurisdiction. We had
Correct.
the installation of the corporation of the United States in 1871 with the District of Columbia and the vassal state, but that really began in the Civil War. And it culminated in 1868, I think, with the identification of American nationals, Americans, right, as U.S. citizens. And then so the corporation incorporated all of the citizens as assets and property in 1871. And then that process was sort of fully completed in a financial and societal control way between 1911 and 1913. And so if you step away from that jurisdiction, you reject your citizenship to the corporation, but you choose to operate as a sovereign being on the land in a common law lens rather than a maritime law lens. You are not subject to certain restrictions or certain jurisdictional ordinances, city requirements, mandates, edicts, all of those sorts of things. And you're also not subject to the laws that are passed by an illegal corporate government. You are, however, subject to participation in the human system if you cause harm. Is that a correct and fair understanding?
I couldn't say it better myself. Yeah. Wow.
That is 100% true. I was literally at the event with Miss Vandersteel. It was a David Strait event. Probably about a year and a half ago, and she had just done all her paperwork and was going through the process. And it was interesting to hear her story at that event in person. She's come a long way, and she's done a huge service for this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize she was at that event. Echo, that's awesome, man.
yeah, that in Dallas. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, nice.
God, you said so much there. I wanted to go in a different direction, but sticking with the Mike Pence kind of direction real quick, SG, Hunter Biden, this whole Hunter Biden thing just bothers me to high heaven. First thing I want to ask you is, do you think he's a plant? Because he does not look anything like the Hunter Biden of 6-7 years ago. And I don't think even with the drugs that he was on and the things that he was doing, he would leave a laptop full of felony photos and drug use at a random laptop store and then just not pick it up. That screams to me that was an operation. And I don't know. I just wanted your opinion on that.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest. As far as Hunter 1.0 or 2.0 or things like that, I honestly don't know. I share some of the same observations that you're talking about. There's clearly differences that are very apparent, and that show that there's some sort of, mask or something at work, but I just don't know what's the story with that. But what you touched on with the laptop, I think, is where we can confidently say that at some point along the way, Hunter turned. Because of exactly what you just said. This is a situation where you have an international criminal who knows that he's an international criminal. He has a laptop full of all of his, not only evidence on him, but all of his dirt on everyone else. And so for him to leave that at a store, that doesn't happen. I don't care how drug addled you are. I don't care how cracked out you are, right? When you're doing criminality at the level that the Biden mafia family and all of the other deep state mafia families around the world have been doing, mistakes like this will cost you your life. The CIA will come and kill you. You don't make these mistakes. And so this tells me that this was a planned operation right from the start, in the same fashion that the January 6th operation, which was launched by the deep state, was also piggybacked on by white hat special operators who went in and took 3 laptops, one of them being Pelosi's. So we took a lot of information off of Hunter's laptop. A lot of it, I think, connected back to Wiener's laptop and involves all of that awful stuff. But Hunter's laptop, I think, is also going to tie us to all of the deep state oligarchs in Europe and East Asia and Southeast Asia, because Hunter did a lot of time over with China, right? And a lot of business with the CCP, and the Biden family was very involved there. So I do think that this was some sort of an intentional act. I think that the only way that it makes sense is that it was an act in return for some sort of off the hook, a little easier than normal, if we will, and whatever that may choose to mean. Q does tell us that there are some deals that are being struck so we can move the needle, right?
Yeah.
If we stagnate mankind in this situation that we're living through right now, we're going to get chaos relatively quickly. We have to move the needle. And the more that we do that, and the more that we can make these sharks sort of eat their own chum, if we will, and eat one another, the more effective that we can, the more fully we can ensure that the deep state apparatus around the world is fully dissolved. If we get them to take out their own house because they're sort of pointing the finger at one another and blowing one another up to save their own, if we will, or selling one another out to save their own, then that just ensures that the spider web is that much more taken down and fully revealed. And I think that also has to be a critical component in this process.
Yeah, and whatever's left can be easier to deal with that way. Yeah, I agree. You got anything, Echo? I think you're muted, maybe. We're having a little difficulty here with the sound.
You just flashed back on the screen, my friend.
All right, you're back on the screen, but we can't hear you. Okay, it says you're unmuted. No, you might have to take off the headset. Give us 1 second here.
All right. How's it sound now?
There you go. Gotcha.
Wow.
Welcome back, sir.
Thank you. I don't know what happened there.
No worries.
So changing directions real quick, because I'm in Southern California. I watched a video yesterday with Dane Wigington talking about the fires in Maui, and they got into the hurricane too a little bit, and the hype it hit Southern California, but it wasn't that bad. What it really did is it did a lot of destruction out in the deserts, the high deserts, and going up into Vegas. There's a lot of road closures, the 15 going up into Vegas and 395, a lot of mudslides. And he wasn't sure at that point on that video if it was real or if they had, this was some kind of operation. But today he came out with a 3-minute clip that showed all the stations that fired up and steered this hurricane, and it literally steered it all the way up into Canada. And it created this high pressure dome over the Midwest right now. And the Midwest is what, 112, 115, you guys are out there, 115 degrees. I mean, just insane temperatures. So how do we,
it's been pretty bad.
how do we deal with that? I mean, how do you fight that, in your opinion, SG?
When we're talking about weather warfare, what we're really talking about is the exercise of very advanced technologies and sort of what we would call weapons of mass destruction, or weapons of mass threat that can be used against the world. And the very best way to fight them, I think, at the moment, from where we're at here in the United States, and we the people everywhere around the world, is to get everyone else to realize that that's exactly what's happening. And when we look at things like Maui, and we have such glaringly obvious evidence to show that this was not a natural event, that this was a manipulated, caused event, and then we have the ancillary evidence, which sort of compounds the problem, which shows that the local ground emergency services, they weren't even on the island. They were on a different island. We had one gentleman who delayed water coming in for more than 5 hours and went on some ridiculous preaching discussion about the idea of water and sacredness and equity amongst, the people. All of this while, businesses and lives and houses were burning down. And it's interesting, I think, to highlight for everyone out there and for the folks that are watching your all show today, that the incident commander for the Las Vegas mass shooting, which was an attempted assassination on the Saudi Arabian crown prince, bin Salman at the time, and just happened to also include, unfortunately, a number of we the people in the middle, because these people don't care about us. That incident commander is the same guy who's the Maui police chief now, and witnessing the usage of the police barricades in that area of Lahaina, and how a lot of the individuals that were told that they couldn't pass the barricades ended up perishing in the flames. This was an attack. That's the only reasonable conclusion that we can make. And so what do we do about that? Well, we have to get accountability for it in the ways that we're able to. If we're not able to trust our institutions, what constitutional allocations do we have? We do have the ability as common citizens to impanel a grand jury, for example. We can take up a petition and organize. We can go and take a large citizen's affidavit. I think you have to have a minimum of a certain percentage of your locality signatures on it, to the county sheriff's office, and you can actually force the sheriff, or force whatever position ties back to what a sheriff would be in your municipality, to impanel a grand jury on the issues at hand. And so that's one way that we can get these things out and get the needle moving in that regard. I think it's also worth, considering that in this process, if we're witnessing high power, essentially weapons of mass destruction coming out into the fold, or what could be classified as WMDs coming out into the fold, one of the reasons that we may be seeing that, and I postulate this on my files, is because if we're in an espionage war where we have to force the cockroaches to show every piece of technology and hidden advanced tech that they've hidden from us in the last 50 to 75 years, and where they've hidden it, and who has access to it, and how they roll it out and deploy it, and how they give orders to one another, the best way to do that is to set them up a nice juicy steak and see if the pit bull will take it. And I think that's exactly one of the things that we're witnessing in this process. And it's really tragic, actually, to tell you the truth. But war itself is tragic. They've been waging war on us for hundreds of years. We're only now aware of it. But unfortunately, this is not anything new, right? Katrina was geoengineered.
Yes.
Hurricane Floyd was geoengineered.
Yes.
The Sandy storm of 2011-12 was geoengineered. There's a tremendous amount of evidence to show that different points along the way, we've had high-powered droughts in the Great Plains and the central Midwest that were geoengineered, caused by exactly what you're talking about with the usage of these high-pressure systems over the Rocky Mountains. And so this is a way that they manipulate the climate, and then they try to sell it to us as climate change. And when all of us become aware that this technology is available and is capable, and what it is capable of doing, that, I think, spells the end for the technology's usage as a whole. It's just an inevitability that requires a bit of time to pass so that we can move the levers of society.
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to add to this as well. Let's not forget, when you were talking about like the what are they, the rods of God, or the laser type equipment, and then different things that they're using for weather modification, that in the recent Maui stuff, if you look at some of the pictures and some of the videos and drone footage they have, there are some footage where everything burned but a blue car, or a blue trash can or basket or something like that. And if you look into laser technology, there is a way to get it so that it responds to only certain types of products. So maybe blue was off for some reason, so all that stuff survived. But it's obvious and evident that it is not natural. Nature, when it responds, it doesn't care what color something is or where something's located. Obviously, it's gonna take care of what it's gonna take care of. So I think that should wake some people up too, to that the fact that this is technology being used, and then that's pretty evident there. So maybe that's a win for the good guys on that's being out there. But I just wanted to say that.
It's funny. This came up about a week ago, and nobody's really talking about it that I can tell. It came up on a show actually with our buddy Nino, And it Cliff High a few years ago talked about a turning point in the war. A major turning point in the war would be when China, the floods hit China. And apparently last month that happened. There was flooding in China, and they were trying to keep the citizens from seeing it by putting up barricades and whatnot. And Juan talked about maybe that we had done that, and Maui was a retaliation for that. No one's really talked about that except him. What do you think, SG?
Well, it's fascinating that you should talk about that, because that's exactly where I wanted to take this conversation. And it's interesting that we should bring this up. This happens a lot on the talks that I have, where the content that I'm researching for the next file sort of just unearths itself on the talk that I'm having on a given day.
Nice.
The flooding in China is evidence of an active white hat operation, and we had kinetic, full bore proof of that occurred at the Durban, South Africa summit, where we watched in real time a bodyguard of President Xi taken down by security forces as he was rapidly approaching Xi. And so this was a what I think to be can only be taken to mean as essentially an identification of a traitorous asset, right? And so if those operations are occurring under China, and I believe they are, and I believe they have been under Xi since the attempted coup of last fall, then it stands to reason that the adrenochrome organ harvesting human medical experimentation complex that exists underneath a lot of the Chinese mainland, and I'm talking a lot of it, would be under assault in this process and would be sort of on the radar. We saw a couple of super typhoons hit the Chinese countryside going back a couple of weeks now, causing record flooding in a lot of areas. I think in addition to taking out some trafficking in those areas, and I talked about this on one of the files, I think it was 56 or 57, about the trafficking that was being isolated in one of the northwestern provinces. And we saw that with some Notre Dame style events that happened at a temple up there. We've also been destroying Canadian-based biolabs and African-based biolabs for the last 2 to 3 months. And I believe Maui is retaliation for all of that, right? Space Force was necessary because we had to digest and aggregate all of the open source intelligence available anywhere in the world on any data bandwidth, hidden in any electronic server center anywhere. That was a tall task, but it was made possible by the incorporation of the U.S. Air Force's secret space program into the command and direction of the newly minted Space Force in 2019, and the technologies that they had available for data aggregation and digestion. And so Space Force is, I think, informs a lot of these special operations by giving them good, wholesome, in the moment, workable, actionable intel. And we've been extremely effective at destroying different strongholds, different pathogenic warehouses, different weapon stockpiles, different personnel bunkers. We watched Putin just last year destroy more than 200 NATO commanders who were in an underground bunker in Western Ukraine. And so we have this actionable intelligence that's being fed to everyone. There's a lot of Space Force on Maui, and there's a lot of Space Force in the area that you referenced with Southern California and Lower Nevada. And so I think that we have retaliatory acts occurring, and we, the people, are caught in the middle of what, again, is this power struggle, this war to end all wars between good actors in society who want to see the world reverted to the correct way, and bad actors who envision a transhumanistic digital enslavement where they essentially are masters of the universe.
I don't see how it could go any other way. There's so many veterans and so many people like myself out there that just want to get involved. And I know Q told us the veterans, remember your oath. Your oath never goes away. And so there's a lot of us out there that we're just waiting. We're just waiting for the right opportunity to get involved even more, and hopefully get called back up into this if and when we're needed.
Yeah, absolutely. The only last thing that I have that I was going to ask, you may have hit on this on one of your latest recordings, but you kind of started mentioning it there at the end about Putin and Russia. Well, we know that just recently, at least in the Mockingbird media, the move is that they sent another, I think it was 100 billion to Ukraine. That's in the news there. Do you have any comments on maybe what that strategy is or what that move would be?
As it pertains to Putin, I really don't know, and I'm not sure what I can predict with President Putin, but I can say that with the events occurring between the U.S., the NATO bloc of nations, and sort of that whole hegemony on the West side, and the ratcheting up of Russia's rhetoric about leaving the dollar, disconnecting from the central bank, Western system, doing business with Russia and China, doing business with BRICS, sort of spearheading, driving the knife right into the heart of the dollar serpent. I don't expect the things that are going on in Eastern Europe to, calm down anytime soon. I expect them to flare up. I expect the Baltic states to get involved in this. I expect NATO to be involved in this relatively soon. As a matter of fact, and I say if because I just don't know yet, but if the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin from this plane crash reported today by TASS agency is in fact true, we can almost guarantee that it was a CIA operation. And we know that Lukashenko in Belarus has been telling President Putin that the CIA is planning to attack and overthrow his government as well, and incorporate Belarus into NATO for the last several years. And that rhetoric stepped up even to a next level after Putin launched his special military operation. And so Wagner has now positioned themselves in Belarus and essentially made Belarus, for all intents and purposes, impregnable without a large kinetic fight that NATO, because of Biden and because of some of the continuity of government operations that are occurring, is simply not able to field. More than one individual and more than one government has come out and said, with regards to NATO's ability to field a fight with Russia, that they just don't have the ammunition, and most of them don't have the properly trained personnel. Russia has thousands of battle-hardened soldiers outside of the Wagner Group, who itself is a very active, very effective, and lethal combat operation. And so I think that this conflict is going to expand because at the same time, the NATO states and the traders that are in those bureaucracies and those corporations and those transnational government NGOs and all of these different areas of society that are based in that area of the world and over here in our area of the world know that if the Russians are allowed to win, they're going to hang for biological terrorism. So this is an existential crisis for them where they sort of have to walk themselves into the meat grinder, even though they don't want to. If there's any chance at all that they can pull it out, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat when they're neck deep in the bear's mouth, that's what they're trying to do. And they're going to wait it out and see if that's possible. And I don't think that it is.
Right.
No, I don't think so. Actually, I was gonna ask you about that plane crash today. I'm glad you brought that up because they're blaming it on Putin, and I'm thinking no, that doesn't sound like that would be the case.
I don't believe so. And I'll tell you why. I think President Putin is and has made himself very apparent in this process that he's much like Trump and that he's going to simply tell you the truth. And if you don't like the truth, that's okay, but he's going to at least put it out there. In other words, it's actually going to exit his lips. He has a very active confrontational posture. He directly confronted Yevgeny with this irregular counterintelligence attempted coup that happened several weeks back within the Russian Federation, which we know was simply an excuse to relocate tremendous amounts of assets and institute a soft martial law. But that's besides the point. Putin presented himself as a very firm, very capable commander, and I don't believe that he would have ordered such an operation. If it was carried out by anyone within Russia, it would have been traitors within the Russian intelligence services who would be the Russian extension of the American CIA. And if anyone thinks that that is not a thing, all you have to do is look at the Russian oligarchs who have been doing business with the Clinton Foundation for a long time.
Yep. One more thing I wanted to bring up with you. You had brought up 1871, and that's a whole nother level that we could go to that we don't have time for tonight. But we know Trump bankrupted the United States Corporation in 2018, and Jan Halper told us that. What's your thoughts on Jan Halper coming out and I mean just blowing the lid on it? I was doing backflips that day. I was so happy that finally someone came out and got this on mainstream media. Well,
I think it goes without saying that I believe it was planned. I believe it was a calculated leak into the narrative warfare space. I think it was the equivalent of an atomic bomb in many regards. And it's interesting that it should come from this individual because, of course, we know that President Trump retruthed her a few days after that initial interview actually occurred. And President Trump's reach is enormous just, on Truth Social alone. But because he is who he is, he also expands far and wide beyond that. But the posts that he shares simply get screenshotted and they go all over the place.
Right.
And so to put that out there again, I think it's the equivalent of an atomic bomb. It's a very calculated move. And this individual was a member of Trump's transition team in 2017 to the White House. And so I look at that as, well, if we have an association that goes all of the way back to the first days of the Trump presidency, we know why the Trump presidency was what the Trump presidency was, right? When we look at what happened with Admiral Mike Rogers and his visit to Trump Tower, and the very next day, President Trump moved out of the tower and moved everything significant out of the tower as well. That was because we had a patriot who was going around the apparatus of the deep state U.S. government that at the time was working for the Hussein Obama administration to sabotage and destroy an incoming U.S. president. And so, Jan Halper Hayes, I think, entering the fray very shortly after that with his transition team, she would have been aware, and especially with her, background and some of the expertise that she has, she would have been aware in some regards that this was going to be a different kind of presidency. I think that she would have known that things like the military standing behind Trump on the podium during the inauguration was significant in some form or fashion, was abnormal and worthy of noting. And this is also someone who's a very studied person who understands executive law and how the U.S. executive law applies to the commander-in-chief role and the U.S. military role. She talks about 13848. She talks about the steps that were taken, to show that the election issue was so big that it truly qualified as an imminent national emergency. It was sort of a catastrophic threat to the republic. And everything post 13848, and everyone's forgetting about this, is still going to be subject to the same restrictions. And that particular order, because it ties into the function as President Trump had to the commander-in-chief role, that order is going to come back. That boomerang is going to come back. And I think it's going to get played into the discovery process for these RICO, 2020 election crime trials that President Trump is currently being indicted for, and many members of his orbit are also being indicted for. But we now have a forum where a lawful former U.S. president who had access to military intelligence and who also put a national emergency in place, which would qualify as a matter of national security, which would tie back to the state secrets privilege precedent of 1953, which we could adjudicate at the court and we could reverse. And I think it does need to be reversed because it's one of the main ways that this cabal has hidden transparency from we the people. If we can accomplish all of that in this process, then we are fundamentally shifting what the law says is possible here in the United States, and it guarantees transparency in the election process moving forward, not just because of the justice that will come from all of this, but because we have now set a new precedent in U.S. law where military intelligence, when it pertains to issues of national security, of which elections would fit that, that particular category every single time, it can be used in a civilian, regular common law court. And if you're going to cheat, sort of cheat at your own peril.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, I wanted to get a little fun here and bring up a topic. I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but Echo, I know we had talked about this too, but we've had some guests on in the past with flat Earth, and I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but I just kind of wanted to get your take on that and that theory that's out there. Do you have any theory? Do you swing round or do you swing flat?
Well, it's interesting. My own personal opinion, my own personal take on this issue is that the nature of our Earth is wildly different from what we're told, and I fall more on the disc-shaped flat discussion with a firmament over top, sort of like a terrarium.
Okay.
And I based that on some, research that I've done, Operation High Jump, Operation Snow Globe, different CIA projects that have been, done, and different deep military projects and OSS military projects, oftentimes with the U.S. Navy. Admiral Byrd, for example, in the late 40s, early 50s. And I look at the notes, but I also acknowledge, and there's a lot of people out there that take this stance, that this entire operation process that I'm referencing as my basis for believing that particular lens could have very well itself been a mass scale psychological operation to hide something else. It's interesting that these people always sort of tell us how things are, and we can look in a lot of pop culture and media and we can find that. And in the Godzilla movies, they talk very clearly and very plainly about a hollow Earth. They also mention Monarch and other different deep intelligence programs and sort of the same sort of things that would be like Area 51, Alice's floor, right? So it's possible that we could have something even more than a flat Earth or a globe Earth. Maybe we have a shape that is multi-layered, and we have different types of planetary material within the planet mixture itself. I really couldn't say. It's not my true area of expertise, but I fall more on the biblical lens. They talk a lot about what people say is a flat Earth in the Bible. I think there's a good basis of archaeological record that supports a lot of what the Bible says, even with the books that have been cut out of it. And we know that they've manipulated that text and others. But I think it's going to be a really spirited discussion, quite frankly, as we move forward. Once we're past some of the more pressing issues as a civilization, the true discovery and the acknowledgement and the appreciation of what our Earth or our realm or whatever we're calling it really is, I think that's going to be a lot of fun together.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And yeah, I think it's something that we need to definitely get into and learn about. But yeah, we do have some more other things I think we should focus on first. So that was kind of what I was going for, just to kind of get your mindset on that, because I kind of was teetering between some beliefs and some of the things I've researched, but also are they using it as a psychological operation to discredit other things that are coming out, or maybe it's a little bit of a couple different things. But I appreciate you taking the time to give your view on that and being open with us.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, SG, that we're not being told the whole story. We're definitely being lied to. And when we had Flat Earth Dave on, one of the key points he hit on was when the Red Bull guy went up. The outside camera showed that the Earth was round, and then when he opened the hatch, I believe it showed just a flat Earth. And if anything, I kind of think that we're being lied to about how big the Earth actually is. It seems like it's probably a lot bigger than they let on to us. But I hope we find out one day. None of us have been that high up where we can see for ourselves. So hopefully we find out one day.
Well, and an ancillary tangent to the discussion here really ties back to Antarctica. Why in the world would most of NASA's budget go back to Antarctica? And we can trace a lot of that money laundering to deep projects that go and that take place in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Why is a tremendous amount of the U.S. Army's Research and Sciences divisions based in the Antarctic shelf? What are they studying down there? Why is it so secretive? Why did 56 nations around the world who couldn't agree on anything, including how to mark shoe sizes, all of a sudden decide that the same piece of lifeless ice was a peril to mankind in such an enormous way that they weren't going to allow even privately funded travel to that particular area of the world, and that you would be turned back by military authorities? They're hiding something.
Yeah,
it's the only clear conclusion. And the question, I think, or the answer to that question, I think, can be not necessarily found, but I think hinted at quite a bit, again, in pop culture. They store a lot of hidden technology in Antarctica. There are other species and other life forms, some of which are sentient, some of which are not, that they study in the Antarctic continent and what I would call the ice ring, but what most people would just know as the Antarctic shelf itself. It's a very, very deep piece of permafrost. It goes several miles down into what you would call the crust of the Earth, right? And I believe it functions as a bit of a gateway in some regards to other areas of our Earth that we're not familiar with. For hundreds and hundreds of years, pirates believed that if you sailed far enough, you would eventually go through a polar area that would take you to a new realm or a new map, a new area of the world. And they were made out to be sort of crazy by all of the authorities around the world in those days. But those authorities operated at the hegemony of the British Royal Navy. And the British Crown has been obfuscating the true nature of everything for hundreds of years. So when we look at, what the issue is with the Earth and the different possibilities that we've got with technology and the different possibilities that we've got with what they've hidden from us through, dark projects and operations and UAPs and what Dr. Greer calls special projects that are handled primarily at the Pentagon and at the behest of other, military intelligence agencies. I think that process will be a lot of fun at some point along the way, but we have to get the teeth unentrenched from the holdout and realize who we really are and what's really going on here.
Yeah, Commander Favor, I watched his interview. He was before Congress with those guys last month, and he literally came out and said he just wants to fly one. He doesn't know if they're ours or if they're theirs or who they belong to. He just wanted to fly one. And when he was chasing that UFO off the coast of San Diego, I believe it was about 150 or 250 miles off the coast of San Diego, and they were all hovering there for a week, and he got to chase one. It bounced from where his location to, I think, 25 or 50 miles away in the blink of an eye. And if that's our technology, they're way ahead of what they're telling us.
Oh yeah. They're always at least 50 years ahead, right? If not 100.
Quick story on Antarctica and a point. I'm sure you'll probably have more to add to this, SG. Is the maps from like 100 years ago don't show any ice there, which makes zero sense to me, but maybe you can talk about that. But when we were in class with David Straight and Ann Vandersteel was there, one of the things that David Straight talks about is the fact that the Japanese were they like the best water on the planet, so they were down in Antarctica drilling a well for what is it, Fiji water? I think it's Fiji water, bottled water, and they drilled down into some kind of a metal craft, is what he called it. And then from that point on, that's kind of when it all got locked down and no one was allowed to go down there. But
well, fascinating. And I hadn't heard the story about the ice not being on the old maps, but when we consider that they've had the ability to use climate weapons and to use atmospheric weapons and literally change the kinetic appearance of the landscape and the weather at the local level right down to the ground level. If there was ever a major conflict in history, and I think we've got at least two good instances between the Atlantean story and the Tartarian story, and I think there's a lot of overlap in the same discussion there. We've got some instances to show that at different points along the way in human history, this same Luciferian cabal has not only been waging war against humankind, but has also been waging war against other sort of light, compassionate beings, if you want to call them that, or love-based beings, right? Because anything that was a reflection of God and his glory, and anything that was a reflection of the goodness and the trueness and the righteousness of life itself, and the right to exist and the right to sort of be your own being, right, was repulsive to this group of individuals that have always been at the top. So I think it's really fascinating, this discussion that we're on about all of these different component parts playing into the hidden realities that we've all been dealing with. And it's the pulling away of the veil, and even the U.S. Congress, like you highlighted, is doing that right now. It's the pulling away of the veil. It's the realization that all of these things that we've sort of suspected for a long time as a civilization are actually true. That, I think, in many ways, even though there's a lot of death and destruction around us, it's exhilarating at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. It's like they say, it's a great time to be alive, but it's also the most challenging time, I would say, to be alive.
You mentioned this, I think, on audio file 59, either 58 or 59, that the end is not for everyone. And that is stuck in my mind for years, wondering what that really entails. And it seems like we're getting a glimpse of what that entails right now.
I think in some respects that may be an accurate interpretation. When we're dropping a power structure that is this entrenched, I mean, so entrenched that when we think about our society, we think about the constructs and the systems that they created, it's sort of difficult to think about the things that are really possible, right? To go outside of the box and appreciate new ways of economy or new ways of finance or completely new ways of going to market, or decentralization of finance and controlling that at the, at the personal level rather than having the bank sort of act as the intermediary and the bag man, for whatever funds or assets or things you have on hand. These are difficult, I think, synaptic processes for most of us out there because we've been so immersed in um, this system of control that has been created, the matrix, really, we could call it that, around the world. Um, and so to break away from that it's going to be a sort of a loud, cacophonous, racketous process. And I think in that process, because of the type of conflict that we're having to fight, we're going to be losing things along the way, including, patriots in the community who don't make it to the other end of this battle because of the types of attacks that we've discussed on this, call today. I think that is part of the reason that when we say the end isn't for everyone, that let me rephrase that. I think that is a good interpretation and a good possibility of what Q meant by that. Now, I honestly don't know what was meant by that, to be perfectly frank. The end, what is the end? Are we talking about this phase of operations? Are we talking about the penultimate event? Are we talking about a singular point in time? I really don't know. But I do know that war is messy and war is difficult. And those who have taken up the oath to support and defend, the Constitution and the Republic of the United States, that makes it even all the more difficult, knowing that it's a war, for their country. It's a war for the consciousness of their friends and their brothers and everyone that's important to them. But I think the encouragement and the salve in that, if I can put one on that topic and that issue, is that in this process, for every loss that we entail or that we intake, we awaken so many more people. I've had incredibly liberal friends who were militantly anti-Trump. I mean, talking the rhetoric that they were going to leave the country if he won the 2020 election, that have now come to me saying, I would rather have Trump than this. This is absolute insanity. These people are just, and they come out and they say, these people are just stupid. I'm ashamed. I had one person come to me and say that they used to be a Biden voter and that they don't really want people to know that. And so knowing that this is the pressure that's happening to the consciousness and that we are converting a tremendous amount of people out there from the left and the center left over to the patriot community, I think by the time that this is all over, it's going to be well worth it, because Q also tells us that no one will be safe and that they won't be safe even to walk down the street.
SG, I really appreciate your time. I know we're running over here. So thanks for coming on. I don't have anything else for you. Echo, do you have anything else?
Actually, I love the fact that the SG always ends his files with a positive note, and I was going to ask him to take us out that way, but it sounds like you just did.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. It was a great discussion.
Thanks so much.
Do you want to let people know where they can find you? I know you're on Rumble and True Social, right?
Correct. Those are the only two places that I am authentically. There's a lot of different copycats, and there's some other social channels across different platforms that have been created, bearing my image and likeness and some variation of my name. But you can find me on True Social authentically at Real SG Anon with a red check mark. And you can find me on Rumble at Q News Patriot. I'm not on Rumble by SG Anon. I'm on there by the Q News Patriot. It's a channel. It's got about 140, I think, thousand or so followers. It's rumble.com/user/Q News Patriot. You can find my work authentically there. I post my files, different chats that I do, and things like that. You're welcome to listen to some of the copycat or some of the regurgitations of the work. Bear in mind that I don't ever endorse things. I don't put things out there for Trump bucks and TRB and some of the other things that have circulated out there in the community. And so if you're seeing something like that on a channel, you can be assured that it is not me.
100%. Thank you, SG. Have a good night.
Thank you all. You as well.